Hello YouTube! Today I'm moving away from my role as observer of the French culture and I'm going back to my roots and talking about what New Zealanders are like and what the New Zealand culture is like. I've been getting quite a few questions on this topic about people who are either wanting to travel to New Zealand for a long time or actually move there, and they're saying, I know that the country is beautiful and there's a lot of amazing things to see, but what are the actual New Zealanders themselves like? What does it mean to be a Kiwi? And obviously this question is massive, but I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Kiwi people, what it means to be a New Zealander, what the kind of general attitudes and behaviors might be, so that you know more or less what to expect when you hit the ground in New Zealand. So I think just quickly, before diving into cultural specificities, it's really important to understand the heritage of New Zealand and who the people are making up this country. So first and foremost, you have our indigenous population, the Māori people, and the Māori people came hundreds of years before the European settlers, traveling from the Pacific Islands by waka or by canoe all the way to New Zealand. Then in 1769, English voyager arrives in New Zealand with his ship full of men, and they are officially the first European settlers to discover New Zealand. From the 1850s onwards, there was huge mass immigration coming from all of the United Kingdom and a lot of areas in Northern Europe as well. We've seen is continued immigration to New Zealand. We're really a melting pot kind of culture. So as we stand today, it is quite mixed. You've got this group that we call New Zealand European, which could be, you know, Holland, Scottish, Irish, English descent, whatever. But we're talking, you know, 3, 4, potentially 5 generations back. In addition to that, we've got about 15% of people identifying as Māori or of Māori origin. We've got 11% coming from Southern or Eastern Asia, and around 8% identifying as Pacific Islander. 1.5 million live in Auckland City, so it's our biggest city by far, and this particular city is second only to London when it comes to the amount of diversity and multiculturalism in one city per capita. So there's always going to be exceptions when you're talking about culture, but in general, what are the New Zealand people like? Well, maybe it's because of our immigrant heritage, but we are renowned worldwide for being very friendly and very warm and very welcoming. It was actually Forbes magazine recently that did a study looking at all expats around the world, their level of happiness and their levels of integration into society. And what they found is that in New Zealand, 75% of expats said that it was easy to fit into the culture there, which is huge. And I get this all the time whenever I introduce myself over in Europe, like, hey, I'm from New Zealand. People are like, oh, I went to New Zealand. The people were so friendly. And I think it is something that we do value as a society, is definitely being welcoming, helping others, opening your doors to people you don't even know, because it's all part of being a community. The downside, of course, of being nice or kind-hearted or whatever you want to call it is that Kiwis are incredibly conflict avoidant and they have a really hard time saying no. So I think for more direct cultures like Germans, Dutch, maybe the French, maybe Russians, New Zealanders might drive them mad because we don't really like to say no, and we don't really like to give people negative feedback. For example, if someone asks a New Zealander, hey, do you want to go out to a concert this weekend? And a New Zealander replies to you like, oh yeah, could do. Maybe. They're probably not very interested, to be honest. New Zealanders are super enthusiastic, so if they're saying, yeah, cool, sure, what time, that's a good sign. If they're kind of avoiding it like, oh, I'll have a think about it, that's kind of your signal. Obviously linked to this friendliness is the fact that New Zealand is one of the world's happiest countries. So according to the World Happiness Report by the United Nations, New Zealand is the 8th most happiest country in the world. And when I'm looking at the countries who rank higher than New Zealand, it's very much Norway, Finland, Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, and I'm like, but it's so cold there. And I think you'll find that in the attitude of people. There's definitely an optimism, a she'll be right, let's keep going, kind of solution-oriented attitude with the New Zealand people. They're kind of yes people, yep, let's give it a go. Another cultural aspect that I really wanted to touch on with New Zealanders is the fact that they're very pragmatic, and one of the cultural slogans of New Zealand is do it yourself. You don't need to call a builder to come and put a fence up at your house. get your sleeves rolled up and do it yourself. If you think about all the work that has gone in over the past 200 years to literally take New Zealand from, you know, basically forest and to create townships and cities and roads and bridges. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but people had to just roll up their sleeves and get stuck in and make it work and make it happen. And I think this has influenced the attitude of New Zealanders. You know, we're huge lovers of renovating our homes, of working on the garden. We're always getting stuck into things. And this translates into the workplace, for example. You often see people being very solution-oriented, very pragmatic, and let's get on with it, very action-oriented. Perhaps linked to our immigration history is the fact that we are very low context communicators. What does that mean? That means that we say what we mean. Wait, back it up. In general, I mean, as I said before, with the conflict avoidance, it's a little bit different. But in general, if a New Zealander says to you, I think you did a really good job at that, that's what they mean. We have a saying which is, call a spade a spade. It's quite black and white, like the communication's very straightforward. Don't feel like you need to overanalyze things that New Zealanders say, that they're trying to, you know, send hidden messages. It's not that complicated. It is what it is. Something that I'm sure that you've probably picked up about New Zealanders worldwide is that we are sports obsessed and very specifically rugby obsessed. Like, rugby is not a game. It's not just a group of men on a field chasing a funny shaped ball. It is really a religion, a lifestyle, a very common hobby, and a huge source of our culture, our entertainment, our bonding. Really revolves around rugby. Even if you aren't really that into rugby, you'll find yourself spending a decent amount of time talking about it, watching the games and attending the games with your friends. It's like a social thing to do. But I think quite a shocking side of that can be like if we lose a major rugby game, watching the whole country go into depression. Guys, it's just a game. One of the core cultural pillars of New Zealand, and one of my least favourite parts of the New Zealand culture, is that we suffer extremely from tall poppy syndrome. You know, if you imagine a field of poppies, beautiful field of red poppies, all at the same height, and there's one poppy that kind of stands above the rest, well, what do you do with it? You cut it down, because then your field of poppies will stay all at the same height and all uniform. So what it means concretely is that if you're someone that's a little bit unique, special, and especially successful in New Zealand, you often get sort of cut down to come back down to the crowds. It's a very collective society. You want to be a good team, you want to be a good team player, and it can be in the smallest way. Like, for example, if you're a guy and you've just got a nice haircut, you'll get teased about it from your friends. They'll be like, whoa, nice haircut. Someone's going out tonight, you know, like you'll have comments made on it because you've got a haircut and it probably looks good. So not only is there that side, but there's also the way you do it to yourself. So New Zealanders have really self-deprecating humor. We're always putting ourselves down. We're always sending signals to other people that we're not arrogant and we don't think too much of ourselves, and we're very down to earth and we're very humble. It's very rare to find a New Zealander who's super arrogant and very sure of themselves and thinks that they're very good looking and this kind of thing. It just doesn't really happen. So I know that Australians really have the reputation for being very heavy drinkers, binge drinkers, and while I don't really know if it's as bad in New Zealand, we've definitely got a drinking culture. For example, we've got bad road toll statistics for people that drink and drive. I'm not saying that everyone in New Zealand are alcoholics, not by any stretch, but I think you'll notice that New Zealanders, and particularly New Zealand men, can drink a lot. Something that you'll notice almost instantly of arriving in New Zealand is that we're really comfortable with our fashion. I think New Zealand has, 2 Louis Vuitton stores and 1 Gucci store in the whole country, and this is really for tourists. We're not really this kind of nation that wants to strive towards these perfect luxury outfits and those designer handbags, although we appreciate them from a distance, but it's not really us. We like to be comfortable. You'll often see people walking around the city in activewear, so gym clothes. They'll be going to or from the gym. You'll see people wearing jandals, and a lot of people say, New Zealanders walk around barefoot. And yeah, it's true. You do see New Zealanders walking around barefoot with no shoes. especially on holiday, because like, why not? You're on holiday, it's a beautiful clean country, you can walk around without shoes on, enjoy it. Overall, New Zealand society is something that's quite, I would say, open-minded, modern. We were the first country in the world to give women the right to vote. So I think that's an awesome testament to how progressive we are. In this way, it's not really a country with very deep-rooted ideologies and religion and traditions and things that would impede progression, for example, like being against, say, gay marriage. So I think like anywhere, just like any nation, there are people that hold different viewpoints, but I think in general, New Zealand's a very open and accepting society. Sometimes we get compared to Australia, who are a little bit famous as being a little bit, let's say, more closed-minded or racist even. And I have actually heard people make the comparison that Canada is to the United States as New Zealand is to Australia. So in terms of the mindset of people. No offense, Aussies, love you guys. So that's all I had to say for this video. I hope that was interesting for you guys. I hope you've got a better feel for the New Zealand culture. If you have any questions whatsoever, leave them down below and I will get back to you. But until the next video, see you next time. A bientôt!